We've all heard of women's intuition, right? Well, men have intuition as well. Intuition is so important when it comes to feeding ourselves and our families in our challenging food environment. This podcast explores a variety of topics related to a powerful, evidence-based eating framework called intuitive eating that integrates instinct, emotion, and rational thought. My hope is that it will help you finally break free of the perpetual diet cycle. This is the Men's Intuition Podcast. All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Men's Intuition Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jeff Ash, and I'm going to just start off this particular episode. I have a special guest here, but I wanted to start it off with a quote from an eating disorder specialist by the name of Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani. I probably butchered that name, but anyway, I love this quote from her from a documentary called Light that is related to the topic that we're talking about today. And what she said is, a mammal who is malnourished isn't going to be playful. They're not going to be creative, and they're not going to be adventurous. They're going to get really rigid, rule-bound, and serious. That's what happens to a lot of people when they've cut too much energy intake. So I thought that was a really great way to introduce our topic today. Our guest today is Amanda Fitt, and she's a nutrition coach for climbers and outdoor athletes who want to fuel their bodies and level up their performance without dieting or restriction. And so as a former climber myself, I was really excited to have her on the podcast. I guess I'm still technically a climber because I do climb sometimes whenever I get a chance, but it's in the gym and it's not particularly often. And it's certainly not while my shoulder is rehabilitating after surgery. But I wanted to have Amanda on today to talk about this because I think it's a topic that relates to so many other kinds of athletic pursuits too that we find ourselves in. And so without any further ado, welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Ash. Jeff. Oh, whoa. Thank you, Jeff. Sorry, shooting strong right off the gate.
Yeah.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for having me, and very excited to talk about this topic as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so why don't you start off by telling us maybe a little bit more about yourself and how you got into the sport of rock climbing.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a nutrition coach, and I was in the realm of nutrition prior to finding climbing. But have not been climbing for very long, actually. I've only been climbing for about 3 years now, but feel pretty privileged to have really dove in headfirst to the sport. I was introduced by a few friends who were outdoor climbers. So the very first time that I went climbing was outside, which I think definitely kind of helps my love for the outdoors and doing this sport outside. And I caught the bug right away. I was a dancer growing up, and I've always used my body in different ways. And this was just an awesome blend of finding like flow within sport and movement while still being outside. So I was addicted right away, to say the least.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I started climbing outdoors myself. Of course, back in the 80s when I started climbing, in Albuquerque where I grew up, there was no such thing as a climbing gym. So it was outdoors or you didn't climb. And so I started outdoors myself. And it's interesting you said that you were a dancer, because that's always been my favorite type of climbing, is the stuff that's almost more of a dance type, like a flowing thing. I never really enjoyed the severely overhung stuff as much. I had fun on certain things. It was always fun to have that extra exposure, especially on a multi-pitch route, where you're dangling above the ground, but I always liked the vertical stuff that was very technical and very kind of dancey, really, in many ways. So that's cool.
Yeah, and that's definitely the type of climbing here at Smith Rock, where I live. So I'm in Central Oregon. Smith is my home crag. It's very technical, face climbing, vertical, and when you get into the flow, it absolutely feels like a dance. So I think that's definitely why I resonate so much with this kind of climbing. I agree.
Yeah, that's cool. I grew when we were climbing a lot in the Albuquerque area. There was a location called Cochiti Mesa that was almost like a little tiny miniature version of Smith Rock. It was that welded tough rock with the pocket climbing and lots of just dead vertical stuff, not much in the way of overhung, and lots of 1 and 2 finger pockets, and so So I always wanted to go to Smith Rock. That was a place I never did make it to, but that's cool that you live right there. So
Yeah, one day you'll have to
yeah,
come check it out.
yeah, yeah. Have to convince my wife to let me climb outdoors again because
Yeah.
yeah, she's not too thrilled with that idea. But in any case, so how did you get into nutrition coaching?
Yeah. So I began, well, rather, I did my first coaching certification course right after college, after my undergrad. I did my
Mhm.
undergrad in chemistry. And really, from, I would say, right after I graduated high school, all the way through my undergrad, I had this kind of developing, budding, just interest in nutrition. A lot of it stemmed from me kind of wanting to heal myself in some ways. I was going through some things that I just wasn't really excited about with my health. I was having digestive issues. I was dealing with some acne. And so, really, my passion kind of budded from just trying to do the work on myself.
Mhm.
It eventually morphed into, yeah, wanting to learn more. And once I did start to learn more and make changes, I wanted to help others as well. So, yeah, that's kind of where it all began. And I think I was a little unhappy after I graduated college as well. Like, I was
Mhm.
always interested in science. That's why I chose a degree in chemistry, but I was never passionate about actually working in the field of chemistry. And so I was really just seeking something to bring some fulfillment back into my life
Mhm.
and to give me a little bit of purpose and direction with where I was going with things.
Yeah, well, and definitely helping other people with challenges that they're struggling with, regardless of what that is, whether it's psychological, emotional, nutritional, physical activity. That coaching thing is just such a rewarding kind of field to be in, to be able to help other people get through and work through those different challenges that they're experiencing.
Oh yeah, I mean, being of service, that is so fulfilling, and you learn a
Mhm.
lot about yourself too within
Yeah.
coaching. Like a lot of reflection going on there, and I think it's just such a great opportunity for personal development, both for the clients and the coach. Like it's just a really wonderful industry to be in. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's cool that you came at it from that direction. So now, serious and even recreational climbers, to a large extent, are kind of notoriously concerned with strength to weight ratio. I know I was back in the '80s. I was concerned with it. Fortunately, it never really took a dark turn for me. It was kind of funny. I remember I logged a lot of my food intake, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I just sort of wrote it down. It was, but I still ate a lot. But because of this concern with strength to weight ratio, often they're attempting to modify the weight part of that in order to improve performance. And I know my old climbing partner, who's the editor for Climbing Magazine, he wrote an article about this, and we both read it, and he talked about how that pursuit of improving performance led to trying to get lighter, focusing in that way, more so even than trying to get stronger. And so, is this something that you have struggled with yourself personally since getting into climbing? And then also, is it a concern for those who you coach, since you've really specialized in working with those climbers?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have done kind of my own personal healing work and healing journey with my relationship with food and my relationship with my body prior to climbing. Like I mentioned, I was
Oh, that's
in the
good.
nutrition space prior to climbing. And so I felt like I had a pretty big advantage in that sense. I was entering
Hmm.
the sport
Yeah.
in a really good place. But having that background knowledge and having worked with folks in the space of, intuitive eating and improving their relationship with food, I immediately saw what was going on in the sport around me. I mean,
Hmm.
obviously, like you mentioned, being it a strength to weight sport, yeah, you can improve one or the other. And oftentimes people choose, dare I say, the easy route, which
Hmm.
might be, losing that bit of weight to give themselves that extra competitive edge. So again, like me personally, I have not struggled with it. As
Hmm.
far as who I work with clients, I think since I do kind of preach this, anti-diet, more, all foods fit, good relationship with food, I tend to attract people who are wanting to move in that direction
That
rather
makes
than who
sense.
are trying to cut weight in order to
Hmm.
perform. But I do get those questions sometimes. A lot of times I have folks who shoot me a message or just have conversations like, how can I get over this? Like, how can I get over the fact that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to improve in my climbing unless I lose weight? I don't look like these other
Hmm.
climbers. I maybe feel heavy on the wall. Like, how can I get over this? And I think it is a really big issue for some people, still very prevalent within the community today.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you mentioned that because, some people have appearance related thoughts and negative body image issues. But other people, it can be where they're not even really concerned with the appearance of their body. But it may be related more to their performance, like you were saying. And so I think it's important that we understand that there are a number of different ways that body image, kind of putting that in quotes, can manifest itself in different people because it's not only about appearance. And I think it's interesting how it can seep into so many areas because I mean as a climber myself and now doing the Ninja Warrior training, that's kind of my thing now. It's very similar in the sense that when I started doing the Ninja Warrior training, the first thought that popped in my head, even though I haven't really struggled with that area, was it'd be great if I could just magically drop about 10 or 15 pounds through my training, not doing it intentionally, but that thought came in my mind, and I quickly had to deal with that because I know that could easily lead to kind of a dieting kind of a mentality. But yeah, I mean, when you're carrying less weight up the wall and pulling, it certainly can give you that advantage. But at the same time, we know that if you're not feeding yourself well, it can really impact your physical strength and your development and even the way your brain functions and processes things and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's the unfortunate thing. And why this is such a complex topic is because there's no denying that it is true. Like, if you are
Mhm.
lighter, you do have less force of gravity being applied
Yeah.
to you as you're holding these smaller holds or as you're standing on these tiny little nubbins or whatever it may be. But, the way that I think about it and the way that I really try to converse with people about this is it's a temporary solution. It
Exactly.
it might give you that slight competitive edge. Maybe it would allow you, maybe these people at these like really top tier levels of climbing, yeah, it might allow you to send your project, but is it really making you a better climber?
Mhm.
Absolutely not. You are not
Yeah.
gaining any technical skills, you are not gaining strength like in the long term and for the longevity of the athlete and the longevity of your performance. Like, there's so many other things that you could be tackling that are going to give you an advantage overall in the long term rather than this acute situation.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too when you think about it, we're all going to hit some kind of a limit, and whether it's because there's a little extra weight and that hits our limit, or whether we hit our strength potential, or whether we have an issue as we get older. I'm 50 years old now. My joints don't work the same as they did when I was 18. And so all of these different factors come into play, and I think it's really easy to get focused on like constantly progressing, but at the
Mm.
same time we are going to hit a limit at some point. And so hitting that limit and feeling good and comfortable and healthy seems like a little bit better way to go about that.
Yeah, and I think that's where, your mindset comes into like
Hmm.
really digging deep and on your why. Like, why are you doing this? Like, why do you perform this sport? Like, what brings you joy? Like, what are your goals? And really getting clear on that because like you mentioned, there's always going to be something, whether it's
Yeah.
age or an injury or weight, like whatever it may be, there's going to be a limiting factor. And yeah, I mean, are you just going to stop doing the thing or take drastic measures that are going to impact your health just to achieve
Yeah.
this goal? Like,
Hmm.
maybe we need to take a step back and work on like your goals overall and your mindset, like I mentioned.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting too, because that article that I shared with you earlier, and I'll for those listening, I'll make sure to put a link in there because we're not really here to talk about the article, but it's a good article, and it also links to a documentary film called Light, and I'll also include the link to that too. But in that documentary, it was really interesting to listen to these top level female climbers talking about approaching it from that weight loss perspective to improve performance, and how detrimental that became to their psychological health and their physical health, and how actually taking a step back and focusing more on, hey, what can I do to improve the strength of my body, feed it what it needs, and coming at it from that different perspective. Even though they were heavier, they actually are superior climbers now, which that. So a lot of times I think we get in this mindset, and it can come in the form of the aesthetic thing. We think if I get smaller, then I'll be happy with how I look, and I won't hate my body anymore. And the same can be said of performance related goals. Oh, if I just lost some weight, or if I just gained some weight, whatever the case may be, because I think this discussion applies to more than just climbing. We often are misguided, I think, in that way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's hard to, when you are in that like mental state, thinking about, is the grass greener on the other side in this other shape or form? It's really hard to put yourself in those other shoes. Like, it is hard to imagine, like, well, like, what if I were a few pounds heavier? Like, could I be climbing harder? So, I mean, that it's, again, with all the nuance, it's just really challenging. And especially if you're in that place of struggling with your body image and your sport, like, it can be a really challenging thing to decipher overall.
Yeah. Well, we get a lot of these messages from culture and from the media with regards to our appearance. And so this kind of takes me to our next question here. Since I'm kind of a bit removed from the climbing scene these days, I'm curious about kind of your observations and experiences at the crag. Do you find climbers and new clients receptive to taking a weight neutral approach? You kind of touched on that. They tend to be the ones you're talking to are listening to your message. But do you find that climbers in general maybe are receptive to taking this weight neutral approach to their training and nutrition, or do you see resistance maybe in some other conversations you have with people? Have you seen any changes maybe over the last few years where we have a little bit more awareness around intuitive eating and that kind of thing?
I do think there's more awareness. Like, there's definitely both. There's people who are absolutely in this sport in a more weight neutral mindset and really trying to spread the good word, spread the message, and getting that across. And there's also people who are still not, unfortunately. I hear, like you mentioned, like, what am I hearing out in the world, out in the crag? And yeah, I mean, sometimes I do hear comments of, God, I'm just too heavy to climb here. Or, man, if I was just 10 pounds lighter, I could be sending 512 like so-and-so. Or, and I just think there's work to be done within the sport. And I see this in social media as well. I see a lot of body positivity. I see a lot of wonderful messages going out there. And on those same posts, there are still absolutely some people making really hurtful comments. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done in the sport. I think there's still awareness to be spread, such as, that documentary that you just mentioned. And I think it starts on the ground. It starts from changing the conversations that we're having at the crag. It changes with ourselves, changing the conversations that we're having with ourselves, and then hoping that can, slowly precipitate out into the greater community overall. So I love the term. There's this one gal within the industry. I think she's a chiropractor, an ex-pro, and a strength coach, Natasha Barnes, and her slogan is "Stronger, not smaller." And I couldn't agree more. And and again, if we have more representation of that within the community, I think that's a wonderful message to get across. So,
Yeah. Well, this next question kind of applies obviously to climbers, but to really anyone who participates in the sport where strength to weight ratio is an issue. So, my fellow ninja obstacle course trainees and those kinds of things, and Spartan races and parkour, ice climbing, all of these different things. So if weight loss as a means of improving performance is potentially problematic and detrimental, what are some of the ways that you specifically help your clients to improve their performance on the rock? Because I know that's a big part of what your coaching is, hey, I'm going to help you do these things without trying to change the size of your body and without dieting and restriction?
Yeah, great question. I think people highly benefit from being properly fueled through food. And so
Mm-hmm.
something that I work on a lot with my clients is proper timing with food. So kind of like what to eat and when around their sessions and really dialing that down. And so many people are amazed to feel like they have so much more energy on the wall and they have all day energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's one of my favorite outcomes and one of my favorite pieces of feedback to receive from my clients is when, if they learn about these strategies, they start to implement them and they're like, oh my gosh, like I just sent, my project at the gym this evening because I had a snack. Like that's awesome,
Yeah.
and there's so many other things. And that's just on the nutritional end of thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
obviously the strength and conditioning side of things as well, technique development, so many things in that category.
Mm-hmm.
But just in the food department, so many things that we can do to, yeah, increase your performance, have you enjoy your time more. When we're properly fueled, we feel better, we're happier. Our
Yeah.
mood improves, so many wonderful things. You
Mm-hmm.
can enjoy your sport more. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would just love to drive the message home that there are so many other means for people to experiment with and accomplish before they kind
Mm-hmm.
of have to result to that dieting, restriction, reducing their energy, all of the above.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really stands out with a lot of the posts that you share on social media is that you're always offering these very practical tips and advice for, hey, try this for this can make a good snack because it's providing you with protein, fat, and carbs, and this if you eat around this time of day and that kind of thing, and none of this is often we can in dieting and stuff we're often told eat this, eat that, eat at this time, that kind of thing. But it's very different in the approach that you're taking because what you're doing is you're strategically saying that based on what activities you have coming, if you fuel yourself in this way and you provide that energy, then you're going to perform better. It's kind of like when I go to the gym in the morning, I drink a protein shake before I go because I want to have something. But at the same time, I don't like having any food in undigested food in my stomach. And so when I go to the gym, and it's a very practical way of kind of looking at yourself and what makes you feel good, what's going to provide the energy you need, and ultimately help you perform better. So,
Yeah, and I think this is really where gentle nutrition within intuitive eating
mhm,
shines. Like I think this is so
yeah,
applicable towards athletes because they can truly find the balance of using these fueling strategies, fueling themselves in a way that's going to help them perform while still honoring their body and honoring their mind and
mhm,
being happy and enjoying food. And yeah, if I could just implement that or implant that into every
yeah.
athlete's mind, I think that would really help kind of bridge the gap between this, how can I eat for performance, but still maintain a really
Mhm.
healthy relationship with food?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and all of those strategies that you talked about fit in. Sometimes I think we think it's very easy in the intuitive eating space to think that any kind of guideline or anything is a rule, and that's not what this is at all. It's more like me. I love to eat donuts sometimes. I don't eat them very often, but when I do, if I'm in the mood for them, I'm going to eat them. Well, I don't like to eat them before I go to the gym, even if the gym is a little later on and I have time to digest it. I still don't like how I feel. Now I like to have them afterward though. And so for me, I have sort of, it's not really a rule, but it's just sort of a guideline where I don't eat donuts before I go to the gym because I don't feel that great. But it's not, I'm not restricting myself from it. And I think that taking that gentle nutrition approach is a way that you don't cut things out. You just find out, okay, if this is something that's important to me and it's a food that I want to eat and that I enjoy eating, is it best to eat it before I go climbing, or is it maybe better at the end of the day after I return home and then I can enjoy it? Is my body going to function better and feel better? And I think those are the kinds of they're just Well, in intuitive eating, it's based on instinct, emotion, and rational thought. So it's a combination of these different things, and so we can apply all of those things to our eating strategies and how we feed ourselves.
Yeah, and how empowering is that to be able to gather that information and then be able to
Hmm.
utilize it in a way that serves you and serves your goals? And I think, yeah, just having that autonomy over your choices. And I think that's, yeah, like I mentioned, extremely powerful. And it's something that, yeah, I hope that we can really push through and move forward with people. I mean, I love that you mentioned a donut. I had half of a donut yesterday and I absolutely love it. And same
Uh-huh.
thing, as you go about your journey, as you go about experimenting and figuring out what works and what doesn't, that in the long run it's going to make you a better athlete. Like having those tools in your
Hmm.
toolkit, not having to rely on an external source to be constantly telling you what you should or shouldn't do. Like you
Yeah.
have this internal knowledge that you're just able to utilize and use to the best of your ability at all times.
Yeah, well, and everybody's so different. So, uh, some people that are thinking of performance nutrition in those terms, they're looking to a coach to tell them exactly what to eat and when and all of this. And, there are certain scientific principles that we can apply to certain things, as far as protein intake and these kinds of things. But ultimately, that's what I love about this non-diet approach is, and intuitive eating in particular, is it helps you explore what works best for you, and so you're tuning into how did your body respond? How did you perform? Well, did you not perform very well? Okay, well, let's look at what you ate before and when. And so it's not a matter of, oh, we've got to cut this out or cut that out or institute this particular rule. It's this exploration. And if you're willing to go on that journey, it can really be empowering, like you were saying.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Man, this has been a really good conversation about these topics, and I did have a couple of some quick fire questions for you, just because I'm interested. I always like talking to climbers, and so I know probably a lot of my listeners are like, "Yeah, this is I'm not really into climbing," but I think a lot of people find it very interesting, and so hey, it's my podcast, so I'm going to take advantage of my time talking to you. So, what do you prefer, indoor or outdoor? I kind of have a feeling I know what the answer is, but
Outdoor, I will say. But I do love a
yeah.
good gym session, a good solid gym session,
Mhm.
especially if the weather's crummy. But overall, outdoor.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
Do you prefer sport climbing or traditional climbing? So, for our listeners, if you're not familiar with climbing, sport climbing is this shorter, more extreme stuff. Often your protection is fixed on the rock. Traditional climbing would be more longer routes where you might climb several hundred feet. Like maybe if you've seen the that free solo uh, documentary with why am I drawing a blank on his name now?
Alex Honnold.
Alex, yes,
Yeah,
Honnold.
yeah.
I don't know why I drew a blank,
That's okay.
but anyway, that kind of thing. So that's that where you do these longer routes. So just so that our listeners understand that. So what do you prefer?
Yes, I definitely prefer sport climbing. Yeah,
Mhm.
traditional climbing, you're placing your own gear. Oftentimes it's in cracks, like you mentioned. It could be longer routes. I'm not the best crack
Yeah.
climber, I have to say. I much
Hmm.
prefer not having to really think, just hopping on the wall, clipping bolts and trying hard.
Hmm.
That's kind of my go-to right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, I started off doing the traditional climbing, and so sport
Sure.
climbing came second, and I really enjoyed going back and forth. In the summers, we would do the traditional climbing because we go up in the mountains near Albuquerque, where it's an 11,000 foot elevation mountain, and so it's cooler, and that was always fun. But yeah, it's also a bit more dangerous because there were a number of times where I remember, you'd place your protection and then you'd have a 50 or 60 foot face climb where there were no cracks to put any in, and they're in this don't fall mindset. So yeah, so I
Yeah.
understand why people.
Totally. I will say it is such a good skill to
Yeah.
have, though, if you do want to go out into the mountains, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
and even do just some easy ascents. So it's definitely something that
Yeah.
I will explore more in the future.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely we always climbed a few notches down from our ability when we did the traditional climbing, and so it was much more of just an outdoor experience, and so it was a lot more, you didn't have to concentrate quite as hard as far as the technical moves themselves, and, yeah, and so just a different kind of experience.
Yes.
Yeah, now do you prefer bouldering or top roping when it comes to, like, training and preparing for like developing your skill set.
Definitely bouldering. I enjoy bouldering. That's definitely my go-to in the gym. So like all winter I was just
Mhm.
bouldering to train. We have all these fancy
Oh, okay.
boards nowadays, the tension board and the moon
No kidding.
board with pretty
I
lights. And
know.
so those are very fun to train
Yeah.
on for bouldering as well. Yeah, I don't really do like
Yeah.
gym rope climbing much.
Mhm.
But I mean, I do love a good top rope outside. Don't get me wrong. I am a top rope
Yeah.
hero any day. But if I had to choose one, it'd be bouldering.
Yeah, you young whippersnappers and your crash pads at for bouldering and all of that. Yeah, back in my day, the closest thing to a crash pad was your partner who had his hand sticking up to prevent you from hitting
Yeah.
a rock with your head, and that was about it. But yeah, we didn't have those back then, and I look at it and I'm thinking, why didn't we even think of that? But nobody used them. They weren't using
Yeah.
them back in the '80s and early '90s. So,
You just
all
hope not
right.
to
So, what is
fall.
your yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and you don't push yourself quite as hard either. I'm watching, as I watch videos now of people doing it, I mean, they just push themselves all out because there's a pad to land on. And so it's a very different mindset. Now, this is an interesting question. I thought is, have you ever done any free soloing?
No, not my cup of
No.
tea. I'm a very
Yeah.
conservative climber. I like to take minimal risks.
Yeah.
Yeah, not really my cup of tea. But although I would consider maybe like a highball boulder
Mhm.
in that realm
Yeah.
ish, but never
Yeah. Sometimes
anything
topping
hard.
out on a boulder is getting up at the. I could really hurt myself if I fall.
Yeah, no fall zone.
So, all right. So, favorite climbing area to date?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I'm impartial to my home crag. I do love Smith Rock, but I
Mhm.
also I do enjoy the bouldering in Bishop, and I say that because we were just there. We've spent a lot of
Mhm.
time there vacationing, and so that's probably my second favorite. Is probably the happies and the
Mhm.
sads actually in the
Oh
Bishop
yeah.
area.
Cool. Well, what climbing destination is at the top of your bucket list? Because I'm sure you have one that you just would love to go to.
Oh, yes. Well, I think in the States right now, I really want to go to Ten Sleep, Wyoming. I would also really like to climb at Wild Iris as well, both similar, limestoney. Um, yeah,
Oh, okay.
those are my top. Hoping to get there soon. Maybe
Mhm.
not this year, but definitely within the next couple years for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Limestone is definitely different than the Smith Rock kind of rock. So different feel and
Yeah, I haven't
yeah.
climbed on
So that's kind of
limestone
cool.
yet. I have heard that Ten
Hmm.
Sleep, it's pretty like vertical limestone with a lot of pockets. And so it actually
Hmm.
is a little bit
Yeah.
more like,
Okay.
techie face climbing. But I think Wild Iris is a
Hmm.
little bit
Cool.
steeper and has more of those like, yeah, steeper formations. So it'd be fun to get best of both worlds.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I was really blessed in the way where I lived. We had multi-pitch granite and we had basalt, which is the lava rock. And these were all 30 minutes away from my house. And then we had welded tuff that was about an hour away. And then we had, I can't remember what this other kind was, but it was about an hour and a half away. It was a little different. And we even had limestone. And so all of this stuff, all within like an hour of where I lived, right there in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is just pretty amazing. So I got to climb on all kinds of different rock, not to mention the stuff that we traveled to go climb on too. So
So
yeah,
cool.
it's fun to climb different kinds of rock. Yeah.
Very
All right.
cool.
So what is your favorite snack then when you're out climbing?
Oof, tough question. I have to say I like a little combination of things. So I like to bring something fresh. I always like to have like an apple or something kind of, thirst
Hmm.
quenching. Definitely something sugary. So I love sugary dried mangoes right now. Those are definitely a
Oh,
top
yeah.
favorite. I also love peanut butter pretzels for snacky things. I think those are definitely like
Hmm.
top three go-tos at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, those would all work fine for me. So,
Yeah.
all right. So, why don't you tell people where they can connect with you, and if they'd like to learn more about you and or work with you, because definitely you target a niche audience that I think people may not even know that there is someone out there to do this and help them with. So,
Yeah, absolutely. People can find me on Instagram. So my handle is at purely_nourished. They can also check me out on my website. So that's www.purelynourished.nutrition.com. And then I do have a podcast in the works. So eventually, hopefully within the next month or
oh,
so,
great.
I'll actually get it launched. And that will be another source of, free information for people to absorb. But
Mhm.
yeah, those are the main ones right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, fantastic. I'll include all of those in the show notes. So if anybody needs to contact you, to read that article that we made reference to, take a look at that documentary, then make sure to check out those show notes. And so thank you so much for taking the time to come on and have this conversation. I think we covered some really important things that I think can apply to a lot of people, not just climbers, but anybody in these different sports where sometimes it's easy to get sidetracked and start focusing on our weight when really there are so many other ways that we can improve our performance and our overall health and long-term well-being. And so, to all of those who are listening, thanks again for tuning in. And I look forward to bringing you more episodes down the line.